Which of these is better, A or B? Well, unfortunately, we can't ask people because, remember episode 5, buyers are liars. So we need to do some A/B testing to actually determine what people's behavior will be. Welcome to episode 14 of the Cheeky Sales Coach A/B Testing. A/B testing is sometimes referred to as split testing, and it doesn't have to be just two things. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but you should be careful that you know exactly what you are testing. Let's look at our word of the day, which of course is a phrase this week. A/B testing is a methodology for comparing two or more pieces of your process to determine which performs better. So here are 6 or 7 things you need to know about A/B testing. I know this seems like a really fancy thing, especially if you're a small company, but A/B testing is really very straightforward. It's not fancy at all. First, let's take a look at what your sales process might look like and how we might A/B test several pieces of it. So a classic sales process, let's say it starts with sending out a letter. How do you A/B test a letter? Well, super easy. You have 2 different versions of a letter and you keep track of which one went to which group. So basically, let's say you've got a list of 1,000 names. You send one letter to 500 of them and a different letter to a different 500, but keep track of it and see if there's a difference in how those 2 letters perform. Another great example is your website. You can set up a test where you've actually got 2 different sites and you send half your ads to one and half the ads to the other and see which website performs better. And it might be the whole site or it might be just the color of one button. You can get as detailed as you want with A/B testing. So thing number 1 about A/B testing, do it. You absolutely should be doing A/B testing for some or all of your processes. You can start with one end and finish at the other, or you can do it a little bit here, a little bit there. Every piece of your process should be A/B tested at some level. If do it is thing number 1, thing number 2 is you have to test everything. Remember episode 6, every piece of your sales process has to do its job. That means you have to go out and make sure that the letter is doing its job, the landing page is doing its job, the subtitle of your email has to do its job, all those things. As you define your sales process, lay out each piece of it in quite a bit of detail and then proceed to slowly go through and test everything. So the subject line of your email has to do its job, the text of your letter has to do its job, the color of the ink you use has to do its job, every little piece. But don't be overwhelmed because you're going to keep doing this forever and ever and ever. Here's one of the interesting things about sales and why it's frustrating for many people. Every time you go out and do a campaign, the world has changed. So even if something worked last time, it's probably going to work this time, but something will have changed. And so you'll need to make some adjustments. And what worked last year may not work this year. The offer you made last time doesn't work this time. As a result, you have to keep testing and testing and testing. Number 3, even though you have to test everything, you also have to remember only test one thing at a time. Here's what I mean by that. You should not change the landing page and the offer at the same time unless you're completely redoing your campaign. But once it comes to testing, test the offer. Test it independent of other things. If you change two things, it's just like troubleshooting. If you change two things, you don't know which one fixed the problem, right? Same thing with A/B testing. If you change two things and you get different results, you may not be able to tell which thing actually had an effect. Now, some people want a daisy chain, right? They want to do A/B, 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 and you know, it'll look a bit like this, where they're actually testing things at different points. The problem with that is that when you do an A/B test at the top, you're going to have different audiences at the bottom. And so you may not necessarily have good results. So remember, test only one thing at a time. Having said that, you can test many variables. So for example, if you say, I want to test the color, you could divide up landing pages so that you've got 6 different colors and determine which of the 6 perform best. And you might determine that, in fact, there are 2 or 3 that perform really, really well. That's totally fine, because you're really only testing color as the one variable that matters. That's very different than testing the offer and the landing page at the same time with A/B tests for both of those things. So you can have up to 6 colors, you can do whatever you want as long as its color is the one thing that you are testing. Number 4, measure before and after. You have to know what you're looking at before you go test something. I know this makes sense, but a lot of people somehow skip this piece of it. For example, let's say that your ads are returning whatever, a 1% response rate. Okay, great. Now you know what the response rate is, so you can change up an ad or an audience or an offer and see if it changes the response rate. But if you don't know what the response rate is before you start, you're not really able to test. So the most common A/B test is what we've been doing and another option. So very often that's the way you do it. So you look at your old website versus a new website, your old offer versus a new offer. And you also need to make sure that you give it enough time so that you've got an accurate measurement. If you've had the same offer for a year and you switch up the offer, you should be able to tell pretty obviously whether or not it makes any difference. If you have only been doing one offer for a week and then you switch up the offer, you may not have enough data to know whether or not the difference that you're seeing is real. In which case, you got to go back and test A and then test B again and again and again. So it's best to make sure that you have enough time for things to actually become relevant. Most people don't know a lot about statistics, and as a result, they're not very good at measuring these things. Trust me, the more data, the better. As a rule, if you're not a statistician, I'd like to see you get 500 data points before you make any decisions. So that might mean 500 impressions of an ad, 500 emails sent out, 500 letters sent out, 500 people visited your website, whatever. With luck, you'll have many, many more than that, but I would say don't make any decisions until you get 500 of something. Number 5 is somewhat related to that. Before you start, determine how much variation you are going to need in order to make a decision. So for example, let's say again that your response rate is 1%. Do you need a 2% response rate in order to go with the new option? Do you need a 1.1%? What is enough for you to decide that you're going to move in that direction? We all hope to do A/B tests, and I have on occasion had them be so dramatic where, you know, it's 60% for one and 40% for the other. So I went with the 60%. But very often we don't get those kinds of clear-cut results. And it's actually good, because what happens is that, you know, when you get something right and then you tweak little things around the edges, you may not be able to get that much extra performance out of everything. But when you look at your entire sales funnel, if you got an extra 1% out of every single step, you would have a dramatic increase at the end. Finally, number 6. I just want to encourage you that every little thing, no matter how small it is worth testing. Remember, I started by saying you have to test everything. I mean absolutely everything, as weird as it sounds. You know, big companies, they spend millions of dollars on just the right color. You know, you've heard of IBM Blue, right? Well, that didn't come from nowhere. They also spend money on fonts. They spend money on the size of envelopes, the offer, right? All kinds of things. So you will never run out of things to measure once you start doing A/B testing. Just remember, every once in a while you need to test something. I encourage you to always be testing at least one thing in your sales process. The call script, the how you greet people, the time of day that you make phone calls, right? On and on and on. There's so many variables, but remember, only do one thing at a time. I know it sounds like a lot of work. I'm just telling you, it's absolutely worthwhile, because if you're constantly tweaking and tuning everything, eventually you will improve your sales process, and you have to keep doing it because you have to keep doing sales. So you might as well be testing as long as you're doing it. For the Cheeky Sales Coach, this is Karl Palachuk, wishing you the best of luck in everything you do. Call to action. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss a thing.